The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky terrain as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles and scanned the horizon. The SEAL team had been moving through the Afghan mountains for 3 days, tracking a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks on American supply convoys. The mission was supposed to be straightforward: locate, capture, and extract. But nothing in this part of the world was ever that simple. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, the team's medic, crouched beside a large boulder, her medical pack ready as always. She had saved more lives than she cared to count, and her steady hands had earned the respect of every operator she had served with. Behind her, the rest of the 6-man team maintained tactical spacing, their weapons ready and eyes constantly moving. The intelligence reports had indicated that their target, a bomb maker known only as the Engineer, was hiding in a compound roughly 2 clicks northeast of their current position. What the reports hadn't mentioned was the small village that sat between them and their objective. As they approached the settlement, something felt wrong. The village was too quiet. No children playing, no women hanging laundry, no men tending to animals. Even for this remote area, the silence was unnatural. Morrison raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. They had learned to trust their instincts out here. Those who didn't rarely made it home. "Santos, Williams, take the left flank," Morrison whispered into his radio. "Rodriguez, Chen, you're with me down the middle. Thompson, find us an overwatch position." The team moved like shadows through the narrow streets, their boots making no sound on the packed earth. Adobe houses lined the path, their windows dark and empty. The smell of cooking fires was absent, replaced by something else, something metallic and sharp that made Santos's stomach clench. As they rounded a corner near what appeared to be the village center, they found the source of the smell. Bodies lay scattered in the small square, perhaps 20 people in total. Men, women, children, none had been spared. The attack had been recent, maybe within the last few hours based on the condition of the remains. "Jesus," whispered Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist. Despite years of combat, the sight of civilian casualties never got easier. Santos was already moving, checking for survivors even though logic told her it was hopeless. Her training kicked in automatically: assess, triage, treat. But as she moved from body to body, her heart sank. They were all beyond help. Then she heard it. A soft moan coming from beneath a collapsed wooden cart near the edge of the square. Santos rushed over and began carefully moving the debris. Underneath, she found a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, wearing traditional Afghan clothing. She was unconscious but breathing, with what appeared to be a severe head injury and multiple lacerations. "I've got a survivor," Santos called out, her voice tight with concentration. "Female, mid-20s, head trauma, needs immediate evacuation." Morrison approached quickly. "How bad?" "Bad enough. She needs a trauma center, not field medicine. But she's stable for now." Santos was already working, cleaning wounds and checking for internal bleeding. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady, and her pulse was weak but consistent. As Santos cut away the woman's damaged clothing to better assess her injuries, something caught her eye. Beneath the traditional Afghan dress, the woman wore what appeared to be body armor. Military-grade, American-made body armor. Santos's trained eye immediately recognized the distinctive pattern and construction. "Commander," she called quietly, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "You need to see this." Morrison knelt beside them, and Santos discreetly pointed to the armor. But that wasn't all. As Santos continued her examination, she discovered more anomalies. The woman's hands were soft, uncalloused, not the hands of someone who worked in the fields or tended animals. Her fingernails were clean and well-maintained. Most telling of all, she had what appeared to be a small surgical scar behind her left ear, exactly where communication devices were typically implanted. "This doesn't make sense," Santos murmured as she continued her work. "Everything about her screams military or intelligence, but she's dressed like a local villager." Morrison studied the unconscious woman more carefully. Despite her injuries, he could see that she was in excellent physical condition, the kind of fitness that came from rigorous training, not village life. Her muscle definition was subtle but unmistakable to someone with his experience. "Santos, keep working on her. Everyone else, defensive perimeter." "Something's not right here." Morrison activated his radio. "Base, this is Bravo team. We've got a situation." As Santos continued treating the woman's injuries, she made another discovery that made her blood run cold. Hidden beneath the woman's clothing, secured to her thigh, was a Sig Sauer P320, the same sidearm carried by American Special Operations Forces. The weapon was clean, well-maintained, and had obviously seen recent use. The woman stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. Santos leaned closer, speaking softly. "Hey, can you hear me? You're safe now. We're Americans. We're here to help." For just a moment, the woman's eyes opened, revealing piercing green eyes that seemed to focus with an intelligence that belied her injuries. Her lips moved slightly, and Santos had to lean in close to hear the whispered words. "Tell Morrison, the package is compromised." Santos felt her heart stop. The woman knew Morrison's name. More than that, she was speaking perfect, unaccented English. Santos looked up at her commander, who had heard the woman's words clearly. "How do you know my name?" Morrison asked, kneeling beside them. The woman's eyes struggled to focus on his face. "Operation Thunder Road. You were my backup extraction." Morrison's face went pale. Operation Thunder Road had been classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people knew about it, and most of them were dead. The operation had involved inserting a deep cover operative into the region to gather intelligence on high-value targets. The operative had gone dark 6 months ago and was presumed captured or killed. "My God," Morrison whispered. "Your ghost." Ghost was the code name for the operative who had been inserted into the region as part of Operation Thunder Road. The person they had been told was a male CIA operative specializing in deep cover operations. The person lying injured before them was definitely not male, but the knowledge she possessed suggested she was indeed the missing operative. Santos continued her medical work, but her mind was reeling. If this woman was Ghost, then she had been operating undercover in enemy territory for over a year. The intelligence she possessed would be invaluable and incredibly dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. "We need to get her out of here," Santos said urgently. "If she's who she says she is, half the terrorist networks in the region will be looking for her." Morrison nodded grimly. "Rodriguez, get me a secure channel to command. Priority 1. Tell them we've found Ghost and need immediate extraction." As Rodriguez worked to establish communications, Santos continued treating the woman's injuries. Despite the severity of her head trauma, the woman seemed to be fighting to stay conscious, as if she understood the urgency of the situation. "The village," the woman whispered, her voice growing stronger. "They knew I was here. Someone leaked my position." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. If there was a leak in the intelligence network, it meant their current mission might be compromised as well. They could be walking into a trap. "How long have you been here?" Morrison asked. 14 months, the woman replied, struggling to sit up despite Santos's attempts to keep her still. "I've been tracking the engineer. He's not just a bomb maker. He's coordinating something big." "What kind of big?" Morrison pressed. The woman's eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened again, they were filled with urgency. "Mumbai. But bigger. Coordinated attacks on American cities. I have the intelligence hidden in the village." Santos looked at Morrison with concern. The woman was clearly in shock, and head injuries could cause hallucinations or false memories. But if what she was saying was true, they were dealing with something much larger than a simple capture mission. "Where in the village?" Morrison asked. "The mosque. Behind the altar. There's a loose stone." The woman's voice was getting weaker again. "Everything's there. Target lists, funding sources, operational timelines." Morrison made a quick decision. "Thompson Chen, go check the mosque. Look for anything that doesn't belong. Williams, Rodriguez, maintain perimeter security." As his men moved to follow his orders, Morrison turned back to Santos. "How is she really?" Santos shook her head grimly. "She's hurt bad, Jake. The head injury is serious and I can't rule out internal bleeding. She needs a neurosurgeon, not a field medic, but she's tough. Tougher than most operators I've treated." The woman's eyes opened again, and she gripped Santos's arm with surprising strength. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently. "There's a mole. In the intelligence community. Someone with high-level access. That's how they knew where to find me." Morrison leaned closer. "Who? Do you have a name?" "I never found out. But they knew things, operational details that only a few people had access to." The woman's grip on Santos's arm tightened. "You have to get that intelligence out. People are going to die if you don't." Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Commander, I've got command on the line. They're requesting confirmation of Ghost's identity." Morrison looked down at the injured woman. "What's your real name?" For a moment, the woman hesitated, and Morrison could see the struggle in her eyes. After more than a year of living under deep cover, revealing her true identity was probably more difficult than physical pain. "Sarah Mitchell, Captain Army Intelligence." Morrison repeated the name into his radio, and after a few moments, Rodriguez nodded. "Confirmed, sir. They're sending a helicopter for immediate extraction." Thompson's voice came over the radio from the mosque. "Commander, we found it. There's a whole cache of documents and electronic storage devices. This is big, sir. Really big." Santos looked up at Morrison with concern. "Jake, if she's right about the mole, then calling for extraction might have just painted a target on our backs." Morrison nodded grimly. The same thought had occurred to him. If someone with high-level access was feeding information to the enemy, then their current position was likely already compromised. "How long until the extraction helicopter arrives?" Morrison asked Rodriguez. 45 minutes, Cabo, sir." 45 minutes in a potentially compromised position, with a critically injured intelligence operative and information that could prevent a major terrorist attack on American soil. Morrison had faced long odds before, but this felt different. Sarah Mitchell's eyes fluttered open again, and she looked directly at Morrison. "They're coming," she whispered. "I can feel it. They know you found me." As if summoned by her words, the sound of distant engines echoed through the valley. Multiple vehicles approaching fast from the northeast, the same direction their target was supposed to be hiding. Morrison grabbed his radio. "All positions, we've got vehicles approaching from the northeast. Get ready for contact." Santos looked down at her patient with newfound respect. Captain Sarah Mitchell had survived 14 months in hostile territory, gathered critical intelligence, and was now fighting to stay alive long enough to complete her mission. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior. "Don't you dare die on me," Santos whispered as she continued working to stabilize Mitchell's injuries. "We're going to get you home." The sound of engines grew closer, and Morrison could see dust clouds on the horizon. Whatever was coming, they would have to hold their position and protect both Mitchell and the intelligence she had gathered. The next 45 minutes would determine whether her sacrifice had been worth it. In the distance, the first muzzle flashes began to appear as their enemies closed in on the village. The real battle was just beginning. The first shots rang out across the village square as Morrison's team took cover behind the crumbling adobe walls. Santos dragged Captain Sarah Mitchell behind a large stone water basin, using her own body to shield the injured operative from the incoming fire. The engines they had heard belonged to 3 pickup trucks loaded with armed fighters, all converging on their position with deadly precision. "They knew exactly where to find us," Morrison growled into his radio as bullets chipped away at the wall beside his head. "Rodriguez, how long until extraction?" 38 minutes, sir," came the strained reply, as Rodriguez returned fire from his position near the mosque. Santos assessed their situation quickly. Mitchell was in no condition to be moved, and they were outnumbered at least 3-1. The enemy fighters were spreading out, attempting to surround the village center where they were pinned down. Their only advantage was the superior training and equipment, but that wouldn't last long against overwhelming numbers. "Sarah," Santos said quietly to Mitchell, who was drifting in and out of consciousness, "I need you to stay with me. Can you tell me more about what's in those documents?" Mitchell's eyes opened with effort, and she gripped Santos's arm weakly. "Coordinates," she whispered. "Target buildings in New York, Washington, Los Angeles. They've been planning this for over 2 years." A burst of automatic weapons fire erupted nearby, and Santos ducked lower. When she looked back at Mitchell, the woman was struggling to reach something in her clothing. "There's more," Mitchell continued, her voice barely audible over the gunfire. "I have a memory card, sewn into my jacket. Everything's on there. Financial records, communications, operational plans." Santos carefully felt along Mitchell's torn jacket until she found a small, hard object stitched into the lining. With her medical scissors, she quickly cut it free. The memory card was no larger than her thumbnail, but if Mitchell was telling the truth, it contained intelligence that could save thousands of lives. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio from his overwatch position. "Commander, I count at least 20 hostiles moving to flank our position from the south. They've got RPGs. Morrison made a quick tactical decision. "Fall back to the mosque. We'll make our stand there until extraction arrives." One by one, the team began a fighting withdrawal toward the mosque where Thompson and Chen had discovered the hidden intelligence cache. Santos carefully lifted Mitchell, surprised by how light the woman felt despite her athletic build. 14 months of survival in hostile territory had clearly taken its toll. As they moved, Mitchell became more alert, perhaps triggered by the adrenaline of the firefight. "The man you're looking for," she said urgently to Morrison as they took cover behind a low wall. "The engineer. He's not here." Morrison looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "This is a trap. They knew you were coming for him, so they moved him out yesterday, but they left something behind. Something to make sure you never leave this valley alive." A chill ran down Morrison's spine. If this was true, then not only was their primary mission compromised, but they had walked directly into an ambush designed specifically for them. "What did they leave behind?" Santos asked as she continued to monitor Mitchell's vital signs. Mitchell's face went pale, and not just from her injuries. "Chemical weapons. Sarin gas canisters rigged to detonate if the village is overrun. They're willing to kill their own people just to make sure you don't escape with what I know." The implications hit Morrison immediately. Even if they could hold out until the extraction helicopter arrived, landing in a village filled with chemical weapons would be suicide for the flight crew. And if the gas was released, it would spread throughout the valley, potentially killing hundreds of innocent people in neighboring settlements. "Where are the canisters?" Morrison demanded. Mitchell struggled to sit up, pointing with a shaky hand toward the largest building in the village. "The grain storage building, basement level. There are at least 6 canisters, remotely detonated." Santos looked at Morrison with growing alarm. "If she's right, we need to get word to the extraction team. They can't land here." Rodriguez had been monitoring their conversation while maintaining communications with base. "Sir, I can relay the information, but they're going to want confirmation before they abort the mission." Morrison nodded grimly. "Thompson, Chen, I need you two to check that grain building. Look for chemical weapons, but be careful. If they're rigged to blow, don't touch anything." As his men moved toward the building, Morrison turned back to Mitchell. Despite her injuries, her tactical mind was still sharp, and her knowledge of the area was proving invaluable. "How do we disarm them?" Morrison asked. Mitchell shook her head weakly. "I don't know. I only discovered them yesterday, right before the attack on the village. That's why I was here. I was trying to find a way to neutralize the threat when they found me." The gunfire intensified as more enemy fighters arrived on the scene. Santos could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different directions now, and their ammunition was running low. The enemy was clearly in no hurry to overrun their position, content to keep them pinned down while reinforcements arrived. "They're waiting for something," Santos observed, scanning the tactical situation. Mitchell nodded with effort. "Orders from their commander. They want to capture me alive if possible. I've been their primary target for months." Thompson's voice came over the radio, tense with urgency. "Commander, we found them. 6 large canisters in the basement, definitely chemical weapons based on the markings. They're connected to what looks like a remote detonation system." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment, weighing their options. They couldn't stay and fight indefinitely, they couldn't call for extraction without risking the flight crew, and they couldn't allow the chemical weapons to be used against innocent civilians. "Can you disarm them?" Morrison asked over the radio. "Negative, sir. This is way beyond my expertise. We'd need an EOD specialist, and even then—" Santos looked down at Mitchell, who had been listening intently to the conversation. "Sarah, you've been watching this place for how long?" 3 weeks, Mitchell replied. "I've seen them testing the remote detonation system. There's a control device, handheld unit. The man who operates it is called Hassan. He's probably with the group attacking you now." Morrison immediately understood the implications. If they could capture or eliminate the person controlling the chemical weapons, they might be able to prevent their use. But finding one specific person in the middle of a firefight would be nearly impossible. "What does he look like?" Morrison asked. Mitchell struggled to focus her eyes. "Tall, maybe 6'2", scar across his left cheek from an old shrapnel wound. He always wears a black head wrap and carries the detonation device in a leather pouch on his belt." Santos was impressed by the level of detail Mitchell had observed even while maintaining her cover. The woman was clearly a skilled intelligence operative who had managed to gather critical information while staying alive in extremely dangerous circumstances. Williams's voice crackled over the radio from the eastern perimeter. "I've got eyes on a tall male with a black head wrap about 200 meters out. He's got some kind of device in his hands." Morrison felt a surge of hope. "Can you take the shot?" "Negative. Too many friendlies in the area, and he's using civilians as shields." The tactical situation was becoming more complicated by the minute. The enemy was using innocent people as human shields. There were chemical weapons that could be detonated at any moment, and their extraction was still more than 20 minutes away. Santos checked Mitchell's pupils and pulse again. The woman was hanging on, but her condition was deteriorating. The head injury was more serious than Santos had initially thought, and without proper medical facilities, Mitchell might not survive much longer. "Sarah," Santos said gently, "is there anything else you can tell us? Any weakness in their setup, any way to get to this Hassan character?" Mitchell's eyes fluttered, and for a moment Santos thought she had lost consciousness. Then the woman spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "The children," she said. "Hassan has a weakness for children. He won't allow them to be harmed. If you can create a situation where threatening him might endanger kids." She trailed off, but Morrison understood immediately. Hassan might be a terrorist, but he had a moral line he wouldn't cross. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to create an opportunity. "Thompson, Chen, are there any children in that group of civilians?" Thompson's response came back quickly. "Affirmative. I count at least 3 kids, maybe more." Morrison began formulating a plan. It was risky, and it would require split-second timing, but it might be their only chance to neutralize the chemical weapons threat and survive until extraction arrived. "Listen up," Morrison said over the radio. "Here's what we're going to do." As Morrison outlined his plan, Santos continued monitoring Mitchell's condition. The woman was a fighter, but her body was failing. Santos had seen enough combat injuries to know that Mitchell was running out of time. Whatever they were going to do, they needed to do it fast. Mitchell's hand suddenly gripped Santos's arm with surprising strength. "Maria," she whispered, somehow knowing the medic's name. "Promise me something." Santos leaned closer. "What?" "If I don't make it, make sure that intelligence gets to the right people. Not through normal channels. There's a mole, remember? You have to find another way." Santos nodded solemnly. "I promise." Mitchell seemed to relax slightly, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Good. I've done my job. Now you do yours." The gunfire around them intensified, and Morrison's voice came over the radio. "Execute! Execute! Execute!" What happened next would determine whether Captain Sarah Mitchell's 14 months of sacrifice had been worth it, and whether thousands of innocent lives would be saved or lost. Santos gripped her medical supplies tighter and prepared for whatever came next. The battle for the village was about to reach its climax, and the fate of both Mitchell and the critical intelligence she carried hung in the balance. In the distance, Santos could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors, but she knew they were still too far away to help. They were on their own, outnumbered and outgunned, with chemical weapons hanging over their heads like a sword of Damocles. But they had something their enemies didn't expect: the unwavering determination of American Special Operations Forces and the critical intelligence gathered by a brave woman who had sacrificed everything for her mission. The next few minutes would determine who lived and who died, and whether the intelligence that could prevent a major terrorist attack would ever see the light of day. Morrison's plan unfolded with military precision, despite the chaos surrounding them. Williams created a diversion on the eastern side of the village, drawing Hassan's attention and forcing him to move closer to the group of civilians he was using as human shields. At the same time, Thompson positioned himself for a clear shot once Hassan was separated from the innocent bystanders. Santos watched the plan unfold while keeping constant pressure on Mitchell's head wound. The injured operative was fading fast, her breathing becoming more shallow with each passing minute. But her eyes remained alert, tracking the movements of Morrison's team with the practiced eye of a fellow professional. "He's moving," Williams reported over the radio. "Hassan is repositioning toward the western building. I count 6 civilians with him, including 3 children. Mitchell stirred weakly beside Santos. "The detonation device," she whispered urgently. "It has a dead man's switch. If Hassan is killed while holding it, the chemical weapons will automatically deploy in 60 seconds. Santos felt her blood run cold. She immediately relayed this information to Morrison, who had to quickly modify his plan. Taking out Hassan wasn't enough. They had to capture the device intact while he was still alive. "Change of plans," Morrison announced over the radio. "We need Hassan alive and conscious, disabling shots only." The tactical situation became exponentially more difficult. Instead of simply eliminating a threat, they now had to conduct a precise capture operation while under heavy fire from multiple directions. And they had to do it all while protecting both Mitchell and the critical intelligence she carried. Rodriguez's voice crackled with urgency. "Extraction helicopter is 15 minutes out, but they're reporting technical difficulties with the landing zone. Too much hostile fire." Santos looked at Mitchell with growing concern. 15 minutes might as well be 15 hours, given the woman's current condition. The head injury was causing increasing neurological symptoms, and Santos was running out of ways to keep her stable without proper surgical intervention. "Sarah," Santos said gently, "I need you to help me understand something. You said there's a mole with high-level access. How high are we talking? Mitchell's eyes focused with effort. Pentagon level, she whispered. Someone with access to operational planning, mission assignments, intelligence briefings. They knew about Operation Thunder Road before I was even inserted. The implications sent a chill through Santos. If Mitchell was right, then their current mission had been compromised from the beginning. Someone with access to the highest levels of military intelligence was feeding information to terrorist networks. Do you have any idea who? Santos pressed. Mitchell shook her head slightly, wincing at the movement. I was getting close. That's why they had to move against me. There were financial transfers, payments to an account linked to someone in the Pentagon. The information is on the memory card. Thompson's voice interrupted their conversation. I have a shot on Hassan. He's separated from the civilians, but he's still holding that device. Morrison weighed his options quickly. They needed Hassan alive to safely disarm the chemical weapons, but they also needed to prevent him from using those same weapons if he felt cornered. It was a tactical puzzle with no clean solutions. Williams, can you create another diversion? Something to force Hassan to focus on survival instead of that detonation device? Williams understood immediately. A well-placed grenade near Hassan's position would force him to take cover, possibly causing him to drop or set aside the detonation device. But it was a risky gamble. If Hassan was injured or panicked, he might trigger the chemical weapons out of spite. Santos continued monitoring Mitchell's vital signs while listening to the tactical coordination around her. Despite the chaos and danger, she was amazed by the level of trust and coordination between the team members. Each man knew his role and executed it without question, even when the mission parameters kept changing. Mitchell's hand suddenly gripped Santos's wrist with surprising strength. Maria, she whispered urgently, there's something else. The attack they're planning. It's not just about killing Americans. Santos leaned closer, straining to hear over the gunfire. They want to provoke a response, Mitchell continued. A massive retaliation that will turn the entire Muslim world against America. It's designed to start a religious war. The strategic implications were staggering. The terrorist network wasn't just planning an attack. They were orchestrating a conflict that could engulf entire regions in warfare. The intelligence Mitchell had gathered wasn't just about preventing casualties, it was about preventing a global catastrophe. Williams's grenade exploded near Hassan's position, sending debris flying and forcing the terrorist leader to dive for cover. In that moment of chaos, Thompson took his shot. The bullet struck Hassan in the shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to drop the detonation device. But instead of falling to the ground, the device landed on a pile of rubble, its status lights blinking ominously. Device is down but still active, Thompson reported. I can see it from here, but I can't reach it without exposing myself to hostile fire. Morrison made another split-second decision. Chen, you're the closest. Can you reach it? Chen's response was immediate. Moving now. Santos watched as the young SEAL sprinted across the open ground toward Hassan's position, bullets kicking up dirt around his feet. Hassan was wounded but still alive, crawling toward the detonation device with grim determination. The race between Chen and Hassan seemed to happen in slow motion. Both men were pushing themselves beyond normal human limits, driven by the knowledge that thousands of lives hung in the balance. Chen reached the device first, but Hassan was close enough to lunge for it. The two men collided in a violent struggle, rolling across the rubble-strewn ground as they fought for control of the device. Santos could see Hassan's finger searching for what was presumably the activation button, while Chen tried to wrestle the device away from him. I can't get a clean shot, Thompson reported with frustration. They're too close together. Morrison was already moving, crossing the open ground with Williams close behind. But Santos could see they wouldn't reach the struggle in time. Chen was skilled, but Hassan fought with the desperation of a man who knew he was going to die either way. Mitchell stirred beside Santos, her eyes tracking the fight. The red button, she whispered. Hassan always keeps his thumb over the red button. That's the dead man's switch activation. Santos relayed this information quickly, and Chen adjusted his tactics accordingly. Instead of trying to wrestle the device away completely, he focused on keeping Hassan's thumb away from the red button, while gradually working the device out of the terrorist's grip. The sound of helicopter rotors was growing louder now, but Santos knew the extraction team would hold off landing until the chemical weapons threat was neutralized. They couldn't risk exposing the aircraft and crew to a potential gas attack. Hassan's strength was fading from his shoulder wound, and Chen was gradually gaining the upper hand in their struggle. But the terrorist had one last card to play. With his free hand, he pulled a pistol from his belt and pressed it against Chen's head. "American!" Hassan shouted in heavily accented English. "You stop now, or I kill your friend and then activate the gas." Morrison and Williams had reached the edge of the confrontation, but they couldn't risk a shot with Hassan's gun pressed against Chen's head. The situation had reached a deadly stalemate. That's when Mitchell did something that surprised everyone, including Santos. Despite her severe injuries, she struggled to her feet and began walking slowly toward the confrontation, her hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender. "Sarah, no!" Santos called out, but Mitchell continued walking. "Hassan!" Mitchell called out in fluent Arabic, her voice carrying clearly across the battlefield. "You know who I am. The woman you've been hunting for 14 months. I'm here. Let the soldier go, and you can have me." Hassan's eyes widened with recognition and hatred. For over a year, this woman had been a ghost in his territory, gathering intelligence and disrupting his operations. She represented everything he had been fighting against. But Mitchell was counting on Hassan's ego and his desire for personal revenge. She was offering him something more valuable than chemical weapons, the chance to capture the operative who had made his life miserable for over a year. Hassan hesitated, torn between his desire to complete his mission and his personal vendetta against the woman who had haunted his operations. In that moment of indecision, Chen made his move. The young SEAL twisted away from the gun and simultaneously yanked the detonation device from Hassan's grip. In the same fluid motion, he rolled clear and tossed the device to Morrison, who caught it and immediately began examining its controls. Hassan raised his pistol toward Mitchell, rage and frustration clear on his face. But before he could fire, Thompson's sniper rifle spoke from across the village square. Hassan dropped without another word. Santos rushed to Mitchell, who had collapsed from the effort of walking across the battlefield. The woman's heroic gesture had saved Chen's life and allowed them to secure the detonation device, but it had cost her what little strength she had remaining. "The device," Mitchell whispered as Santos knelt beside her. "There should be a green button marked Safe. Press it for 5 seconds. Morrison followed her instructions, and the blinking red lights on the device turned green. The chemical weapons were now safely disarmed, and the threat to the surrounding area was neutralized. The extraction helicopter appeared over the ridge, its rotors beating loudly as it approached the village square. Santos knew they had only minutes to get Mitchell aboard before she lost consciousness completely. Rodriguez and Williams worked together to load the cache of documents and electronic intelligence from the mosque, while Thompson and Chen secured the detonation device as evidence. Morrison coordinated with the extraction team, providing them with details about Mitchell's condition and the priority intelligence she carried. As the helicopter touched down, Santos carefully lifted Mitchell and carried her toward the aircraft. The woman's eyes were barely open, but she managed to speak one last time. "The memory card," she whispered. "Don't let it go through normal intelligence channels. Find someone you trust completely." Santos nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that Mitchell was placing on her shoulders. The injured operative had spent 14 months gathering intelligence that could prevent a massive terrorist attack, and now it was up to Santos to ensure that information reached the right people. The helicopter lifted off with Morrison's team, Mitchell, and the critical intelligence they had recovered. As they flew toward the medical facility where Mitchell would receive the treatment she desperately needed, Santos reflected on the events of the past few hours. Captain Sarah Mitchell had volunteered for one of the most dangerous intelligence missions imaginable, spending over a year living among enemies who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her true identity. She had gathered intelligence that could save thousands of lives and prevent a global conflict, and she had nearly died protecting that information. But her mission wasn't complete yet. The memory card Santos carried contained evidence of a high-level mole who was feeding information to terrorist networks. Until that traitor was identified and stopped, American operations would continue to be compromised, and brave operators like Mitchell would continue to be placed in unnecessary danger. Santos looked down at the unconscious woman lying on the helicopter's medical stretcher. Mitchell's breathing was more stable now, and her pulse was stronger. With proper medical care, she would survive. But Santos knew that Mitchell would never truly rest until she knew the intelligence she had gathered was being used to protect innocent lives. As the helicopter flew toward safety, Santos made a silent promise to the brave woman beside her. She would personally ensure that Mitchell's sacrifice was not in vain, and that the intelligence she had gathered would reach the people who could act on it without exposing it to the mole who had already caused so much damage. The mission was far from over, but thanks to Captain Sarah Mitchell's courage and determination, they had taken a major step toward preventing a catastrophic terrorist attack and exposing the traitor who had been selling out American operations. In the distance, the village they had left behind was already being secured by follow-up forces who would ensure the chemical weapons were safely disposed of. Hassan and his network had been neutralized, but the larger threat remained. The real battle would be fought in the intelligence community, where dedicated professionals would work to identify the mole and prevent future compromises. But for now, Mitchell was safe. The immediate threat had been neutralized, and critical intelligence was in the hands of people who could be trusted to act on it. It was enough for one day, and more than enough to justify the risks they had all taken. Santos adjusted Mitchell's IV drip and monitored her vital signs as the helicopter carried them toward safety. The woman had proven that heroism came in many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with intelligence, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause greater than oneself. The story of Captain Sarah Mitchell would be classified at the highest levels, known only to a select few who understood the true cost of protecting national security. But Santos would never forget the lesson she had learned from the injured operative, that ordinary-looking people could accomplish extraordinary things when they possessed the courage to act in the face of overwhelming danger. As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, carrying its precious cargo towards safety and medical care, the village below returned to silence. But the impact of what had happened there would ripple through intelligence networks and terrorist organizations for years to come, potentially saving countless lives and preventing a conflict that could have engulfed the world. It was a victory earned through sacrifice, courage, and the unwavering determination of professionals who understood that some missions were worth any price.